just walking into it shrugging and saying, whatever, I'm not doing that. If I win or I don't care. If I don't fight this with everything that I've got, personally, I've failed my era.
There are dire warnings that New South Wales will be hit by increasingly extreme weather.
2015 was the hottest year since climate records began. Figures show this July was the single hottest month in recorded history.
Australia sweltered through its hottest spring on record.
Climate change is now affecting every country on every continent.
It's the rate that's of great concern.
And what do you put that rate down to?
Oh, it's human activity.
We have everything we need. Some still doubt that we have the will to act, but I say the will to act is itself a renewable resource.
Hello and welcome to Climactic. This is episode 40, and I'm your host, Mark Spencer. On the 18th of March, 2018, disaster struck a small town in southeastern New South Wales. The town's called Tathra, and it's quite small, only 1,200 residents, and it's in the Bega Valley Shire. A fire started there at 12:30 in the afternoon, and less than 6 hours later, 69 buildings were destroyed in the town. Amazingly, no one lost their lives, but in the aftermath of that event, one local councillor who'd run as an independent had had enough. She'd heard then Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull on the news at the local evacuation centre, quoting an old poem by Dorothea McKellar, saying that Australia always had the worst of it thrown at it, that it was a land of droughts and flooding rains and the land of bushfires, that nature hurls her worst at Australians and has for always and always will and always has. And later that night, this councillor woke with the start at 4:45, with the words ringing in her ears, always will, and she decided that enough was enough, that she'd seen massive changes in that town in the 18 years she'd lived there. And someone needed to speak truth to power to say that no, the environment is changing, these fires are getting worse, and thousands of people's lives are at risk. That councillor's name was Jo Dodds. And Jo, since I've first heard about her a few months ago, has been one of these real lightning rod figures for me. The time I spent at Friends of the Earth last year covering the state election really showed that people really actively followed Jo. And Jo had become quite a leader in this movement because she was just so unafraid to say it like it is, especially in Australia where everyone's quite scared about putting themselves out there. She wasn't afraid to step forward and say what needed to be said, and to say it really strongly. So it was an absolute pleasure and honor to be approached by Jo to come on the show. And I was really blown away that she wanted to come on little old Climactic and talk about not only what had happened in Tathra, but what is to be done about it. So I hope you're as excited to hear this as I am to bring it to you. But now let's get into this chat with Councillor Jo Dodds. But you're currently a council member on the Bega Valley Shire, also known as the Sapphire Coast region of southeast New South Wales.
Yeah. Dairy production's huge, so a lot of dairy farms, because we've got a really great microclimate, because we come off the back of the Monero plain, and you drop down into the Bega Valley, and then you hit the coast. So in that zone, and we're quite a long shire, I think we're about 100 k's long, something like maybe a little bit further actually. And in that zone, we're much more lush, mostly, than as soon as you cross the border to Victoria, and in some ways to the north as well, but certainly to the west. So we've got this little sweet spot where we've got really good dairy country. And we've also got a big aquifer underneath us and other couple of things that I'll have to kill you if I tell you, because there are secrets to why it's such a good place to live, particularly in a changing climate. So, yeah, dairy's big and strong and traditional. There's a lot of forestry in our region because most of our shire is composed of state forests and national parks. So that's a big industry. Fisheries was a huge industry, is now much less a part of that factor.
And those are fisheries off the coast or in the rivers?
Off the coast, yeah. We did have a big fish cannery in the southernmost town of Eden, but that closed probably 20 years ago. So it's been a struggle for that town to then, that battle continues because we do have pretty high unemployment rates, particularly for young people. So there's still challenges in finding, the right industry mix for the area. But we're hoping that renewables, a lot of us are hoping that renewables will provide some of that in that transition time, because we've got the perfect storm of every kind available. lots of sun, lots of wind, lots of ocean.
Yeah. Plenty of capacity, plenty of potential generation.
Yeah.
So that's straight away a really interesting overview of the council from a council person who is very eyes open about climate change, and your way of looking forward for that council is amazingly and refreshingly realistic. You're talking about renewables and them being a way for young people to go forward, and
doesn't necessarily mean the whole council's on board with that. So, and I should distinguish between what I think and what I might say in my role as an activist versus what council's position is. So they're quite different things at times. So, but it's certainly we'd be interested in having that conversation as a council with any industry that wanted to come to the valley, and there's people wanting to do renewables. So we'll have that chat. Yeah.
So it might be good sort of up the top here, because the previous politicians at the local level we've had on the show have been Greens affiliated. And I understand you are an independent council person.
Before I ran for council, which was not something I ever intended to do. So I'm the accidental councillor, the accidental activist. I'm just a road crash that's working out at the moment. So
we like those stories.
Yeah. So when I did decide to run for council, which is about 3 years ago, then I knew I could have gone to the Greens locally and said, I'm interested, let's chat. And I know a lot of them personally, but I had a big think about it, and I thought I think, and at the end of a lot of thinking, I maintain that for local government, because you can, and because it's the level of government closest to people, that you should avoid, if you can, coming from a party. Because what are you doing in that case? Who are you speaking for? If you can come up out of your community, like I have, and speak for your community, you don't need a party to do that, because it's might be harder in the cities to get onto a council. You might need more money for advertising and all that. But I came with no money, barely a background, no history in politics, and I got in on the first try, just through the sweat of driving around to everything that opened and shut and sticking my nose in and saying, I'm Joe, I'm running for council. That's all that I did, basically. And I'd written a lot of letters to the paper in the past. So, maybe people were familiar with my name, complaining about the sort of things that... and now I cop the letters in the paper on the recipient.
That's great when the tables flip like that.
It's a real learning curve. But it proved to me that you can do it as just an individual. And I think what I was wary of was if I'd come in as a party member, then I would have had to do what council needed me to do and stick to all of their rules. I would have had to do what a party wanted me to do and stick to all of their rules. And then at the end of it, who do I turn around and I go, and community. And I thought, that doesn't sound right to me, because community wouldn't have rules for me the way the other two would. So the less that gets in between me and community, it seemed to me that would simplify it, and that seemed to me a better road. It's also a harder road because you haven't got the guidance. I can't go to any group with a hard decision and go, right, what's the position? Tell me what it is. Give me a speaking sheet, and off I trot. I can't do that. No. I've got to do my own research.
Yep. Spend that time with the constituents and have the cups of tea and then synthesize it down to useful information. Because you're going to get the sentiment, but you have to know what you're actually going to do concretely. I've got this sort of maybe fever dream that someday listeners of this show will be running for office themselves. So, and I love this idea as well of, if you're going to run for council for a reason, if you can do it as an independent, you should. What were some of the hurdles that introduced to you, though, in terms of getting on council? Did you build a volunteer team at all yourself, or how did that go?
It's going to take more energy. You're coming from a dead start. Often, it depends, what a person's background is, but for someone like me, but that's the nice thing. I did come from a dead cold start and I got in on the first attempt. So, hello everyone, you can do it. If you've got half a mind, stick your hand up, because it's really important that we get more diversity in council. That's the other thing. So the way it's set up now, it is easier if you've got the backing of funding, just the money, The money, I couldn't pay for those big core flute signs. I couldn't afford them. So someone just managed to gab together some old bits of whatever he had lying around, painted it all orange, because that was the colour he used to paint his house, and then wrote Go Joe Go, which was the slogan my boss thought up in the one little meeting I had to brainstorm this. And it stuck. All that worked just because it was seat of the pants stuff. But you do need people around you. You do, and I did that. I found some core people who were passionate and said, we'll be your team to get you in, like a campaign team. So my campaign manager was just a friend who had zero experience doing this before, but if the best thing she could do on some days was to pack a really healthy picnic lunch to keep me going, because I was so tired, I really did hit a few walls on the way through, and just come with me to a few meetings, then that was critical that she did that. So just having those few people around you who will join in whatever needs to be done, because there's a million little jobs that need to be done, and you're going to have to think on your feet, and things will go wrong at the last minute, and there was so many hurdles. And I'm a pessimist. So when things go wrong, when I'm trying to achieve something, I tend to want to just go, oh, well, that's it. We're done. It's not going to work. And I had to come to every one of those and go, not doing it. I'm going to get through this hurdle. So I learnt to walk through brick walls. But you can make yourself do it. And it was just that thing of people, I've made a public declaration. People want me to do this. I've made that clear. It's not just me for me. It's me representing a lot of people who've said, yes, we want you to go and do that. So I felt this real, not duty, there was that, but there was also this kind of force behind me. Kind of zeitgeist, a kind of community, just something bigger than me as a single person. That was important, because that pushed me through those brick walls and got me over the prickly hedges and, yeah.
Fantastic. So with that, the last sort of question about council, you said that, if you do, you can come as an independent and bring something new to council. You can bring diversity, which is what we need. What's something you think you bring to council now that hasn't been there before or wasn't reflected there before?
I don't know that I do bring something that hasn't been there before, because I think as a small rural council, we've had good people come through, but not always enough to make a difference, because we've got 9 councillors, so it really depends what the mix is. But I think over the years there've been outstanding individuals who've done a good job, and I'm just sad that I didn't really pay attention to local politics till it annoyed me enough to start looking harder and to recognise what it was. And I know that's what most people's experience of local politics probably is.
When it's working, it gets no attention, and you only get attention when it's broken and failing.
And it barely makes the media, because state and federal get all the, they saturate everything. They've got the money, and it's rarely as newsworthy, because news is no longer so much a regional focus. So going back down that train, I don't think I'm that exceptional, and nor do I think I'm that good a person for the role. It just happened that when the time comes that you need to stand up and say something, it doesn't matter how good or bad you are for the role, you need to stand up and say it. And if what you're saying is relevant enough and then carries you to the next point where you say something important, either it's relevant enough to carry you on or it isn't. And if it isn't, then you fade
You'll
into
have got to
background.
that point at least.
Yeah, so there's a bit of that too, like, cometh the hour, cometh the woman. But there's nothing special about me. Oh, maybe I'm a bit chatty. But, other than being able to stand up and go, okay, I feel like running away and hiding right now, but I'm going to make this speech. And you do it till you've gone, you go through the fear and eventually go, oh, well, I can do this. So a lot of that, you just step up to what you've got to do. And I think these are times that call for that. Someone has to step up. And if you're the person culturally we are reticent about identifying ourselves as good, let alone fabulous. I'm not saying that I'm either of those things. I have my foibles, but I'm happy to claim the good stuff too. But I had to learn to do that, and learning to do that more publicly is really awkward in this culture. So, and that's an ongoing battle. But I guess it's not just confluence when it comes to climate change, because it's not just tall poppy syndrome, which tends to apply more to women than men, is the other thing. And women internalise it, which is the other thing. So it might not even be coming from an external source. You just have absorbed that you're not supposed to do this. But I know there's a lot of people I wish would speak out more who've got great stories and they don't feel able for numerous reasons. But tall poppy is just one of those. It's just another, straw on that camel. That.
Yep. On File Joe, you've got this quote, it's kind of your bio, and it's, "Climate destruction is the biggest issue of this era. For future generations' sake, act now." And that's totally bad. That's really cool to have right there on the bio of a councilwoman. How long have you had that up there, if you can remember, and where did that come from?
Okay, this is an interesting trajectory, because I've been a member of Clean Energy Fraternity, who's a local group in Tathra. started by a bloke who's a good friend of mine now, Matthew Knott. And he started that in 2006, I think it was.
So was that Clean Energy Fraternity?
For eternity.
For eternity.
For eternity, like
Gotcha.
forever.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Not frat bros for clean energy.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
No.
Thank you.
So it started in response to him. There was an extraordinarily hot day, a New Year's Day. So he had a copy of the Weather Makers. He read that on this day that was 48 degrees. It was off the scale. And he put the two, I mean, he's a surgeon, so like he's science trained anyway, and he just went, this is unacceptable. What are we going to do? And he called for community members to come down to the beach like a week or two later, I don't know how long, to form a human sign saying Clean Energy Fraternity. And our town's got like 1,200 residents, roughly. 3,000 people turned up.
From where?
Yeah, everywhere.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. Incredible. So it was one of those moments where everyone felt that day. Everyone was going, what the hell? And everyone went,
This is not normal.
Not normal. And they noticed, and all they needed was him saying, this day, this time. And we formed this huge sign. This group started. So I was a member from day dot, lots, as was, 3,000 other people. Well, I don't think they all joined, but, they were there.
Yes.
And that put climate change kind of to the front of my mind for the first time. I was aware of it. In fact, my dad's cousin, who's in his 80s, it was his whole career, was ice core sampling in the Antarctic, all that stuff. So I know that it's been studied. We've been warned for decades and decades, but it's only in the last couple that we've actually started having a common public conversation about it. So anyway, 12 years I've been in this group talking about climate change. 2 years ago I got onto council and I immediately stopped talking about climate change. That's interesting. Hardly noticed that it was happening, but it felt to me like politics was a very dangerous place to say the words climate change. So I'd internalised, more so than the tall poppy message, I'd internalised that critical assault that's been perpetrated on anyone who wanted to raise that flag and say, I don't feel safe in this heating up, in this changing environment, seeing the things I'm seeing, I don't feel safe. You weren't allowed to have that conversation in politics.
There are none little signals displayed by other council members of like, oh, I've got my keep cup. Oh, I'm friendly to this entire realm of real things.
There's a Greens councillor. She was awesome. She kept saying it, but she had the backing of the Greens and the backing and the pushing,
Yes.
So they're behind going, go into council and say that. So she was bravely saying things about climate change. The Greens agenda, she was putting it forward, and pretty good on her because she wasn't getting much traction. Like even I wasn't really, every time she did it, I was kind of going, that's dangerous. I'm with you, but that's dangerous. That was the background talk in my head. So it's difficult to put the finger on whether there was anything else going on in that room that made me feel unsafe. I don't think anyone was doing anything or saying anything in particular, but that was just it didn't feel relevant to the room.
The status quo ante was not welcome to climate change conversation.
Yeah, and we had other things. We had to talk about the toilets and the roads and the
rates, roads and rubbish. There's enough to
stuff.
keep you busy.
And it just keeps plonking onto the table in front of you, and it's very literally concrete sometimes, and other times it's you're dealing with libraries and airports and waste infrastructure, and there's a lot to do. So it's very easy to be caught up in the day-to-day decisions and never go, but what are we going to do about that enormous thing that's hovering over every single living thing on the planet? When's the day where you have that conversation? And then I found the day, and that was the day after an enormous bushfire rolled through my town and region and just about wiped me out, as well as, wiped out 69 homes in my town and area. And we were just lucky that nobody died. So, and I don't know that I could have had the conversation if there had been deaths or even severe injuries, which there weren't. So that was the event, though, that just put the fire literally under me, and I went, what on earth am I doing? I've got this far in speaking out, and I've stopped before I've said the most important thing of all to say. And the Prime Minister came, as they do. He came to town like a day or two later and went to the centre where everyone was, in refuge, and hugged people and the media followed him around, and that was all good. He did good things, but then he made some comments about climate change, and it was in response to Richard Di Natale having said that it was a climate change related event, our fire, and the Prime Minister said, now is not the time to politicise a disaster like this. And there's an element of truth to that. However, he then said this is the land of, droughts and bushfires, and always has been and always will. And it was the always will that suddenly just lit me, because those words meant we're not going to do anything different. It always will be like this. And I went, what? So it's not enough that 69 homes. It's not enough that we got away with no deaths. You're just going to let it happen to the next town.
There was something that shook up that moment you're all meant to take in the present after a disaster and actually say, okay, we now need to look forward again. He actually introduced the future perspective. And then you're like, wait, yeah, okay, let's start talking about the future. And we need to do something, like the future is demanding action right now.
And it was that, cognitive dissonance of all of that, trying to hold all of that. And I literally did wake up in the middle of the night, 4 a.m, I went doing and always will. I remember just going doing, and in the dark, flipping open my iPad, and by the time the sun had come up, I'd bashed out letters to the paper. I'd just gone, there's not a minute to spare. That's what I thought. There's not a minute to spare to save the next town.
You had a light bulb moment.
Yeah.
I've been looking for those since I started the show. I always ask, is there a moment in your life,
I've got a few
prospective
now.
guest, and you've got them. That's amazing.
Yeah, and that was, that's an expensive, a very expensive light bulb.
Yeah.
To sit and wait for that.
The 2 years opportunity cost, but then the fire itself, which granted, none of us are crazy enough to think that that fire was avertible within the last 5-10 years, but that scale of thing.
Yeah, but it's crazy to think, we survived. We had time to get out. If we think, see, the word that keeps coming up, because in my role, we have the fire services guys, the Country Fire Authority, and Rural Fire Service, it is in New South Wales. We've got Country Fire Authority in Victoria. We have the head guy come in and he gives us a briefing at the start of the season, the fire season, and he'll come back in other times when there's critical stuff because he's a major emergency services guy, and he keeps using the word unprecedented. They didn't just use it for one fire. Each one's unprecedented. So that means each one is building bigger than the last. So if we think what just happened was bad, we ain't seen nothing. That's what I want to avoid. And I don't think we can. I don't think we're going to get there quick enough, but just walking into it shrugging and saying, whatever, I'm not doing that. If I win or I don't care. If I don't fight this with everything that I've got, personally, I've failed my era. I didn't know it was going to be a test. Turns out it is.
That's true of every generation.
Yeah.
Not to do World War II again. No one living through the Cold War was realizing they were going to be in this ideological struggle between titans.
Yep.
Where everything they did reflected on an entire way of living in human organization. No one asked for that.
And yet the lessons of that are being tested, just this month in Melbourne again. So, where the learning rubs off pretty quick.
It does. Forget. Yeah. It's, I don't know if it's reassuring or not, but sometimes it is amazing just to step back and just to actually look at humanity. And it's like, we build amazing things, we do amazing things, but God, we're still very simple and tribal and unevolved.
Yeah, yeah. And we don't work on ourselves constantly. We slip back. That's the other thing I notice. You've got to keep pushing to stay. It's a much higher state of mind than that tribal and the personal and the smaller stuff. And some people are born to that state of mind. The more open they've got future sight. Maybe they read more science fiction when they were young. Maybe they're just those people with the meta views that come more easily. And there's a little bit of me that's good at meta view, but I sink back into my distractions and hobbies and, the personal minutiae takes over very easily. But once you've seen it, if you choose to go back...
You're going back knowingly. You're turning your
knowingly. Back. That's really... And there's a moral element to that then.
That's right. It's cathartic to a point. But talking about action and what we can do, we're having you on a couple months out before a pretty momentous time, and any election these days is momentous because we do have a small window and we do need to get a lot done quick. So with the New South Wales state election called for March, what are your feelings sort of going into that election season in New South Wales? How are things looking at that high level?
Yeah, well...
You know a lot more about it than me.
Maybe I do and maybe I don't. Look, it's this. I guess you're scaling up what's happened to me personally in my town and in local government. You scale that up, and you're now looking at Menindee Lakes, the fish kill that's just happened in the last couple of days, where you've got 100-year-old fish. I haven't had that confirmed, but those are giant fish. They are very old, just in their millions dying, and they're just the visible aspect of a dying ecosystem. There'll be all kinds of layers under that of microbiomes and the rest of it that are disappearing and we're not even paying any attention to because we just look at the big things. So I think in some ways seeing an event like that so close to the election it's not good, but it's vitally important because it makes it really patently obvious to a lot of people what's happening. And that is linked to climate change, but it's also linked to the more concrete management of the Murray-Darling Basin water. And I think issues like that are going to, like there's been footage of those two blokes, a farmer and his mate, standing knee-deep, holding those ancient fish. They've been crying and they're begging for someone to recognise what's happening, what's going on. When you see ordinary people who've been trying to get on with their lives and who deal with the climate as part of their work, standing there doing that, that's when that becomes more real for people in the cities who are not as connected maybe to their environment. So I think, I'm hoping, I'm praying that people will be more concerned and that will carry through to the ballot box and that they'll, and I don't need to plug a particular party. What I want people to do is to approach their local members and ask them what they're going to do about it and tell them what they want done about it. If they don't like the answer, too. And then if they don't like the answer, go and find someone else and ask them what they're going to do. And then, if you find the right person, vote for them. Mm. But, it's got to be top of your list because nothing else will, every other problem we've got will get worse if we don't solve this one. So, and it's the personal stories that really make a difference. Like you can prattle on about, the science of it, and you can prattle on about the big players and the politics, and none of, people just, it's white noise to people getting on with their lives. But when you tell a story, like those farmers standing there holding the fish, that's visible, that's got individuals involved. And when I've stood up in front of crowds and told them the story of my Tathra experience, of standing in front of a fire, of watching it come, knowing it's burning my neighbours' homes, because I could see the black plumes coming up out of the forest. The grey is the forest burning, the black is their house. Then more grey, then more black. And going, okay, that's Jan's house. Okay, that's the girl's place. Okay, that's, and going, okay, there's only 3 places more and then it's us. Counting
dominoes.
That. Yeah. And that's climate change coming for me, for everyone, one step at a time. I'm getting this privileged position, this view right now of watching it come to take my house with everything in it. I can see my house across the distance. And in telling that story and telling the story of what was in my house that I thought I would lose and didn't, but what my friends whose houses were lost did lose and what that did to them, that story stuck in people's... I couldn't believe the people who came up after I spoke about that with tears in their eyes, just wanting to hug me and wanting to express how
they felt that
had hit them. Yeah. And that was often people who were completely across the whole... they knew the whole climate change thing, but suddenly it had reached a new level. So it's not just happening in Fiji and it's not just happening in you know, the low-lying Bangladesh. It's not just happening at the polls. It's happening coming to a town near you. And then life is never the same. Like the people whose houses, doesn't matter how good your insurance is. That's the other thing. You can't insure your way out of this. No insurance will get back what you had before the fire.
Yeah, excluding the priceless things, excluding the memories and the photos, but just in terms of monetary value.
I think we have to be really careful, again, about being distracted by this argument that if you are a good person and you change your light bulbs to fluorescence and you do all your recycling and you ride your bike everywhere, you can fix this. No, you can't. It won't happen. You need to make your politicians stop the fossil fuel industries. All right? That's the other con that's going on, is the people who think they're doing the right thing, unless they're making their politicians push back against big industry, we can never do it as individuals, changing our own behaviours. It is important to do that, but it won't get us over the line. So, I go to Bali every year. There's a revelation, and it's pretty well the only flight I take. I live off grid though, so I'm completely solar at home. I reckon I'm offsetting what I need to do that, so I can make my own sums add up with my footprint. But I thought that was enough, and it isn't. What I need to do is make sure that my superannuation isn't working against me. You know, I've been saying to people, make sure the biggest investment you have is your house. Make sure your other biggest investment, your super, isn't going to burn that house down. Because it doesn't add up.
No, it
right?
doesn't.
And people don't realise where their super's invested. I never thought about it. If it's in fossil fuels, you're burning your house down.
Blunt.
Yeah, we've got to be. It's the time for not pussyfooting. I mean, look, I shouldn't say pussyfooting around. It's not everyone can get on board with the conversation I'm having with you because it's too blunt for a lot of people. So this is a conversation for people at the pointy end going, I want to, I want to get on this and thrash it. But to bring change more broadly in the community is a much more subtle conversation.
Yes.
Which really is a whole other kettle of fish that has to be cooked slowly.
Yes. I completely agree with what you're saying about personal sustainability. We've talked a bit about it on the show, and I've read the articles, and it's just empirically true if you add up the facts that personal sustainability does not get us to a climate change averted, safe climate world.
Yep.
But what it does do, and here my kind of conjecture on this and my working theory is, if you do want to ask your politician to do something, if you do want them to front up to big oil and the fossil fuel industry, you do have to show you've got skin in the game.
Yep.
That this isn't just something, I read this article and now I'm concerned and now I'm coming to whine to you, local council member, like I do everything else. I've made changes in my life. I've either, gone off grid, or I'm not flying as much, or I've done this, or I've done that. It doesn't mean you have to give up everything. Like I have said on the show before, I'm not going to fly. I feel bad if I do. I am. I'm going to fly back to New Zealand next year for the first time in 6 years. I'm saying it here for the first time. I feel like I'm going to fall off in the chairs and die. I'm glad I'm doing it with you. But what I'm doing, I'm at least aware of, and I'm thinking about, and the things that are detrimental to the planet, I am trying to justify, working to counter them. And what that does is when you go and speak to your council member, or go and speak to your state MP, it says, look, I've already invested in this. I've already put stuff on the line. I've already sacrificed stuff. I'm not just saying it. I'm living it. And now I'm demanding you do something because I've already done something. Is that the lever we've got?
Oh, hell
to pull?
yeah. Like my neighbours who lost their home, the week after, they went and paid the final instalment on their off-grid solar system that they just bought, that no longer existed because it was burnt down by a fire started by the grid and accelerated by climate change. Now, the power that couple have to go and speak out is immense, and Jan is doing that. She's speaking out, and they're the people, the millions of people now being affected who should be knocking on the door saying, I'd like a word. And put a burnt object in front of that politician and say, that's it. That's what's left of my life. That's what climate change did to me. This is what I want you to do. It's hard to argue with.
It is. Going back to sort of the council dynamics, how do you weigh up now with, now you've had this moment, glad that your home survived. I don't want to at all speak flippantly about a thing that was traumatic to your town. Now that this has happened and your eyes are fully open and you're on the ground running, how do you balance the short-term operations of council as a council member with this long-term crusade you're on?
Yeah, look, it's a challenge because not everyone had the same experience as me. And there was debate within council about what I'd done in speaking out, that it was inappropriate, that it was offensive to the people who'd lost homes. And I'm happy to acknowledge that it would have been difficult for a lot of those people to have heard me say that so early. And that's awkward for me because I don't want to hurt anyone. Mm-hmm. But in that moment, I had to make a decision. Some people might get hurt by this, but if it doesn't get said now, it actually won't get said. And I had to then decide what was more important, and saying it was more important, I felt, in the role I was in the profile that I had, and in the moment, and the criticality of that moment from that meta view. It was going to turn on that moment, so I chose to speak. So there's people in council who would have chosen not to if they'd had that same dilemma, and I honour that because you've got to make that decision personally.
For them, it was the right choice.
Yeah. So, but it leaves it awkward to now, because that notion of, well, when is the right time then? Mm-hmm. If now isn't, when is? And that moment never comes of its own accord. You know, it never arrives in an envelope, and you don't get an email from the climate. Well, I guess that's the next mission. I think we've had a bit of space. We haven't got past the first anniversary of our fire, and we had a second fire. I haven't mentioned that one yet, but the first fire was March 18. By August, that's winter in Australia, we had another fire start in National Park, just rural area, National Park farmland, and that one took off, got into the National Park. It's a really rugged country, really hilly, so it was very difficult to fight. And National Parks threw everything at it. They had nearly 20 choppers. I counted about 14 one day, just in high rotation, just all day long, 14 helicopters. Imagine what this costs. Mm-hmm. Bucketing water onto this fire to try and suppress it before the big winds came in spring. Like, we're in winter. And there was a day I drove down from Canberra, and it was snow on the top of the mountain, and it was dusk, and I drove through the snow, and I went down the mountain, which is only 10 minutes, and I got to the fire. And I drove past the fire, and I just started to cry, because I thought it looked like Mordor.
Yeah.
I've come home to Mordor. Yeah. And if this is happening in midwinter with snow on the mountain, I can't get my head around what summer could be. And you've seen the charts today that have just come out. Hurrah, just broken more records with, it's another hottest year.
Third hottest in instrument history.
Yeah, so it's changed my whole outlook towards summers, I thought it was summers, but once our winter fire happened, I was like, okay, so there's nowhere safe.
Year-round. No. We've forgotten we live in a dangerous place that we don't forget, we haven't realized we live in a very dangerous place.
Yeah.
We've made more dangerous.
And people were inclined to say that's about living in forests, and they forget about the Canberra fires, which were largely grass fires, and then suburbs on fire.
Yep.
And Black Saturday, which happened in 2000, I think that was 2008, was it? Yeah. That changed the rules again. So again, that word unprecedented, like, I'd always thought that when a fire came, because I live in a forest, I thought when the fire comes, I'll take safety in town. In fact, I'll go to the pub in Tathra. Well, that fire went all the way around the pub. It burnt houses on all four sides of that pub. Well, three, actually. So, there went my plan.
Well, if we're going to anthropomorphize nature a little bit and say you're sending us messages, it's like the winter fire was the text to say, hey, I'm not sure if you got my call.
Yeah. Did you get my earlier call? You haven't rung me back. Yeah.
Hey, at least I left you the pub. So, thanks.
And the pub was critical because it's just been renovated. The guy sold all the pokies to pay for the renovation and created this fantastic space with local music and music from outside. And it's become this really important community hub. And then after the fire, that's just been the place everybody goes. And when you walk in and you've had a hard day or you're not coping, you can go to a pub and there'll be someone else there. You clock eyes and you go, yeah, it's that kind of day.
Yeah, these are big talks. I generally try to have a good breakfast before.
They're big talks because we have to have. It's so easy to move away from what's uncomfortable, and the incidents in themselves are incredibly uncomfortable, and the backlash is uncomfortable, and the conversations you've got to have after all that are uncomfortable. But if you give yourself too much ease and you move away, then you don't want to go back to that. So you've got to. I find I've got to just keep pushing and go, I'm going to talk about it again and again and again until I can't anymore, because to each of us who's got that story, you've got to tell it.
That's right. So one of the reasons basically I started this is because I was finding it hard to find conversations at this far up the stick at the pointy end, because I find it hard to introduce the topic into conversation because I immediately want to jump to, so how do you reckon society will be drastically different in 30 years when we haven't fully addressed this, because we're probably all a bit too lazy and sort of inured to capitalism to really change our lives. And what's a particular thing that you enjoy now, or like an activity or a hobby or something that you like, that if you think about it in terms of climate change, how will that be different? Or like, what do you think about for the future in any kind of way?
Two things kind of immediate. Like, one of the things I've always done is walk a lot. So around Tathra, around my home, walking in the forest, around Tathra, I've got, I don't know, there's 10 or 15 different walks that I might choose on any given day, and that's my break from all the other shit. Now, every single one of those walks is blackened. So it's like, even the places that I would go, which were all nature places, it was all to go in a place where there weren't many people, to walk along a trail. And every single one of them is blackened. And I had this moment where someone who's an incredible optimist, who's been trying to sort of G me up through some of this, and we were on the phone to each other, and she said, what are you doing for yourself today? Because I was feeling pretty bad, and she knew that. And she said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm going for a walk. And she said, oh, that's a good idea. Bathe in the green, the green, whatever the expression is. And I had to say, mate, where I am, it's all black. It's black. And she went, oh, yeah.
I feel like Frodo going through Mordor on my walk.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Everything is Mordor. So in that sense, that's already happened. And when that happens, one of the other things is that your landmarks all disappear. Not just in the built environment, but the natural environment. I knew my way along my road, 3 kilometres of road. I knew where I was at every moment because there were landmark trees and landmark, there's an orchid there, there's a big tree there, there's a fallen one there, all gone. So it took me 3 months of driving before I knew where I was on my road anymore, because it was so changed.
That was the corner where the gum tree always was, but
that's what it is
I don't know what corner that is anymore.
Well, what do I call all these corners? They're all just black dead tree corner now. And all the big ones fell down, or they got chopped down because they were on fire, they chopped them down. So, there's a whole rewriting of my landscape, built and natural. That's one big change. The other thing I like doing is going to the beach, and it's one of those things. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but it seems to me that with rising sea levels, the beaches will all go. Like, has to. I don't know where they would go otherwise, because the sea will be where the beach was. So
that's right. No, the beaches will be seabed, and the new beach will be a road.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
We all have coastal roads. We all want the
going
road to
through
be
the
as close
cafe
to the
that you used to go
can.
to.
Yeah.
So we're picturing
water.
these futures for ourselves, and that's what keeps me awake at night. Is I picture myself getting old, and then where will I be? What will I be doing? Every one of those pictures I can come up with is impacted by climate change. Every single one of them cycles, for me, back to, well, I won't be living in that nice place by the beach because that'll be underwater. I won't even be going to that beach because that beach, as formed currently, won't exist, because beaches take a long time to form. We're suddenly shifting all of that to a different place. So a nation which prides itself on being a beach nation is not having a conversation about that aspect. We talk about the rising sea levels hitting houses and things like that's the only issue. And I'm watching going, yeah, all right, well, that's private property being impacted. And, of course, that's going to be a massive tragedy and shift for those people. I get that. But we're not even having that next conversation about
we're skipping step one to go to step two. It's like, what about what's between the beach and the house? We're going to lose the foreshore.
The whole thing with the board shorts and the people in the life-saving gear. So much of what we think we are is connected to those places, and they won't be there I don't know what will be there. I don't know what can be, because I haven't seen what happens when an environment that's been, a liminal environment that's been fairly static for tens of thousands of years suddenly isn't.
It kind of becomes a lot of those areas will be lagoon-esque because it'll get up the beach, down onto the road, and those are lower areas. So you're going to have like what used to be a roadway, basically. And on all the bits that weren't gently sloping up the beach will just be eroding. It'll be this jagged kind of like in the process of eating like a cookie kind of landscape.
The soft bits won't be the liminal soft bits. And as a councillor, that's something we're charged with, because we're in charge of place in a way that state and federal government aren't quite. So I've seen the flood maps, and I've seen, this stuff gets put in front of us. We don't have how are we doing this without our heads exploding? I don't know, but we're able to look at these maps and kind of start addressing these problems without ever saying the words climate change. But I don't know, we'll get there.
You're like choir directors of cognitive dissonance.
Yes,
like,
exactly.
It's master class. Like.
Can I just acknowledge one other group that's given me heart, because I think I want to end with some optimism, and that's the Schools for Climate Change. When I saw that start, I was just ecstatic. And I happened to be in Castlemaine, which is where two of the girls are from. It was just, again, the synchronicity has just been blowing me away. But because I'd spoken to my niece and nephew, who were 20, 21 and 19, after I'd been speaking out about climate change, and they'd heard me give my big spiel, and they'd seen the scary photos and everything, and I said afterwards to my nephew, what do you reckon? Like, just talk to me straight. How am I doing? Is the message effective? And he said, you know what, Joe, I've got so much on my plate, like young people have. It's just one more bad thing. And I went, oh, and it really, because up till then I'd been thinking, when are young people going to step up? Every meeting I go to is full of grey heads. They're all concerned, but there's no young people there. When are they going to step up? And then when my nephew said that to me, I went, I'm thinking about this the wrong way. They didn't cause the problem. They're going through all the shit that I went through when I was that age, and it's incredibly hard, and it's even harder now. The economy's harder. We've got social media to deal with. There's just so much on their plates, and then we're saying, oh, by the way, we've used up everything. It's a shit
deal. The future is closed. Come back later.
What are you going to do about it? And I thought, that's not fair. I'm not going to ask a young person ever again to do anything about climate change. If they want to and they can use my help, I help. But I'm not putting that responsibility in front of young people. And then Schools for Climate just blew up, and I just was ecstatic. I drove around Castlemaine one day looking for the girls, because they were sitting outside someone's office. So it was on social media. I couldn't find which office. And so I just wanted to tell them, you are so beautiful and strong, and to give them all the encouragement I could, because, again, when that message comes from young people saying, how dare you steal from us our futures. My future's not that long. I'm 55 or whatever, and so I can envisage kind of just escaping below the bit where it all goes pear-shaped. But to be a young person now and look at that future, Jesus, it's not fair.
Follow along the back of that march that we had in Melbourne, surrounded by like all the older people I knew who were all the wardens and everything, and just that vibe in the air, the young people were right, and that they knew the truth.
Yeah.
And that all we had to do was follow what the young people were saying, and it would be better.
Yeah.
That was really refreshing.
Look, I think I've said this about council, if you just resourced a group of year 11 students and you said, here's an issue, here's the resources we've got, let us know if you need any more, you make a decision, they'll make the right decision.
Yeah.
And they'll have less biases, and they'll have less, there's less external influence.
Yeah, learned less biases, yeah.
They've just learned all the stuff you need to know.
Yep.
They're right for it. I think we could do really well listening to young people, warning us, because they've got the science fresh in their heads. Mm-hmm. They're not so coloured.
Human capacity without as much of the human baggage. Yeah, what are your hopes for the new year, Joe?
A couple of concrete things in council. So I want us to at least get to a vote on going 100% renewable, having that as our goal in the Shire. So it doesn't mean that we have to do it. Like, people get scared about the whole goal thing. It's not. It's a target. And I think we need to set that. And I think I'm living in a place that has a good chance of both setting it And Tathra has got so many runs on the board in terms of raising awareness, in terms of already getting solar panels onto every community building. We built a solar power station for the sewage treatment farm, community funds. Like we know how to do it, and then we got the fire. So we're the township that needs to take that to the rest of the shire and say, hey, how about we do this?
Yeah.
How about we aim for 100%?
It's not just for show that you're doing more, it's for survival.
Yeah. So, that makes a good concrete goal that I think we can actually achieve and then set about doing it. So I think we're in a good position, and I think there's enough goodwill, plus the fires sort of moving back in our coping. There's not to underplay that, there'll be years more of rebuilding, but we can come through this stronger if we acknowledge what happened and work with it, not against it, and say, all right, if these are the conditions, this is how we progress.
Fantastic, Joe. This has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your
Mark.
time.
Yeah.
And all the best.
Yeah, you too. Thanks so much.
And that was the one and only Jo Dodds. It was such a pleasure to get to speak to her. I'm so grateful she reached out, and I hope we can have her back on again soon. We've gotten so lucky lately with the amazing people reaching out to us and the great opportunities we've had, and we're so excited about what we're bringing you in the next few weeks. There are so many more amazing stories to come this year, and I can't wait to bring them to your ears. And if you want to hear even more amazing stories, I highly recommend you come along to the Sustainable Living Festival in Melbourne, happening on the 9th and 10th of February, where I'll be doing my first live event with some past and future guests, right there in the main tent of the festival. But if you are there, please feel free to come up and say hi. It would be great to meet you. Thanks again to our guest this week, Jo Dodds, and thanks to the whole team. Producer Hazel Fidecaro, editor Rich Bowden, composer Greg Grassi, designer Abigail Hawkins, correspondents Georgia Scheel and Maxine Baisley, and senior advisor Gretchen Miller. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week.
The Climactic Collective.